Hey everybody, welcome to Office Hours. I'm Jeremy Champa from Higher Learning Test Prep, and Office Hours is brought to you by Higher Learning Test Prep as well as RemoteTutors.com. And so today we have a couple of questions. We have 3 questions in math, I believe. They're all from practice test 7. A student asked us to look at the end of, I believe it was the non-calculator section. And then we're also going to look at a single question from the grammar test from practice test 6. So let's get started here. We'll start with the grammar. Let's just get that one completed if we can. Okay, so through the vortex here and out the other side. Hopefully you're looking at my screen now. And let's start by taking a look at this grammar question. I believe it's the last screenshot I have saved here. Yes, okay, great. So this is from practice test 6. It's near the end of the test, and we're looking at number 43. And you know what? We got 42 on the board. We might as well talk about that too, since some students have struggled with that question in the past. Most important thing to notice on 42 is that, first of all, with every question, you want to analyze, based on the answer choices, what you're actually being asked to do. So there's changes in these apostrophes or lack thereof in these spots. Right? So that's what you're asked about, possession. Okay, so DC Comics superheroes, comma, line. There's also a comma to consider. The original has a comma, but the line is a superhero line. So this word superhero is an adjective. We usually don't want to separate descriptors, adjectives, things that describe things from the words that they describe. And so another way of saying that generally on the test is less is more. Deal with less punctuation if possible. So let's just cross A off right now. The other thing is that the line isn't something that's owned by the superheroes. It's a line of comics owned by DC Comics, right? So we can cross off anything that has an apostrophe superheroes in it. And actually that finishes our work here. Now we just have D as the answer, and we really didn't have to think about the first part. The first part is probably the hard part. It's that DC Comics is a company. So DC Comics, and then we're saying that that company owns something. So the company ends with an S, comics with an S. You just put an apostrophe there, which is a little bit unorthodox. And unorthodox is kind of the name of the game on the last 4 of these questions 41 to 44. So weird stuff happens. I mean, that's a rule that you want to be comfortable with. But more than anything, I want you to notice that by breaking this question in half, we really didn't have to consider that, because we knew that the superheroes don't own the line of comics. It's really that the comic company DC Comics owns the line. So we're not going to put an apostrophe S because there's no ownership by the superheroes. Okay, so let's get on to the question that we were actually asked to talk about, which is number 43. And this is a pretty interesting question. There's a few things worth saying here. The first thing that we're going to talk about generally is the idea of equivalencies. And what I mean by that, I'm not even going to write out the whole word. The word equivalencies, things that are equal to each other. Really, there's not a big difference between however and yet. Right? I mean, like, those kind of say the same thing. There's only one major difference between those two. The difference is that the word however cannot go between 2 full sentences. So the word yet is part of this interesting set of words where you can put an independent clause. Independent clause is a fancy way of saying full sentence. You can put an independent clause, and you can use a comma, and then you can use any one of the single syllable conjunctions. You call those monosyllabic conjunctions if you want to sound fancy. Mono meaning one, syllabic meaning syllable. Fanboys, this is the word for and nor, but, or, yet, so. Any of those words can go in between 2 full sentences. And actually on this test, if you see comma plus fanboys, that's definitely what's happening. The only exception to that rule is, you know, if you do a list 1, 2, comma, and 3. But other than that list which uses a comma plus the word and, which is one of the monosyllabic conjunctions in the fanboys list, other than that example, you really won't see them using a comma plus one of these words to indicate anything other than 2 full sentences. Now, in this case, you know, it was worth mentioning that just because it's true that that's a different set of equivalencies. But in this case, we can be pretty sure that since there's a comma after the word yet, notice it's not fanboys, comma, independent cause. There's a comma here right before we're going to add one of these words, but another comma afterwards. It's probably not about connecting two full sentences. So that probably means that we don't have to worry about the difference between however and yet. I mean, you could even be more sure because if you read back from the beginning, for both commercial and arguably creative reasons, that's not a full sentence. If you're wondering about how to figure out if something's a full sentence, I have a really neat trick. Just ask me about it and I'll be happy to share it. But in the interest of saving time, let's just agree that that's not a full sentence. I'd be happy to talk about that trick in another video. Suffice to say, if we're not separating two full sentences, then the word however and the word yet do exactly the same thing. And the word nevertheless is what you might call a subset of the word however. So like if however works in this much of a range, just for a visual example, nevertheless is a smaller range within that. Another way of saying that is that the word nevertheless, I've described it as saying like, nevertheless could be a city in the state of however. So here's nevertheless. Nevertheless, sorry for my bad writing, but that's nevertheless. And then however is this larger territory. What that indicates is that you can never have nevertheless be a correct answer when however is present. It could be a correct answer otherwise if you didn't have answer choice B. But it's impossible for nevertheless to be correct when however is also correct. And this goes back to the idea of a standardized test. You know, the idea is only one answer can be right. So they can't say to you, well, technically, nevertheless is more descriptive and more precise, so that's the right answer. Because if you were to say that, you would be saying that technically, however, is incorrect, not that it's just, you know, subpar, but still acceptable or something like that. So, you know, another way of saying this, just to be perfectly clear about what I'm saying here, is that nevertheless, pretend that someone asked you the question. Let's go back to this metaphor about cities and states. If someone said, if you can guess which place I live in, I'm going to give you some options. If you can guess which place I live in, then I'll give you $100. Okay, great. And then they were to stipulate only one of my options that I'm going to give you is where I live. The other one cannot be, none of the other ones are where I live. Only one of them is right. And if they said to you, well, you know, here are the options for where I could live. I live in either the USA, or I live in California, or I live in New York, or I live in Detroit. Well, you know, I did hear cities and countries, so I could widen out here, but you know, you could say, you would stipulate to them, well, are you sure there's only one of these places where you live? And they go, yes. Okay, well, then I know what the answer is. Because if you live in California, A is also the right answer. If you live in New York, A is also the right answer. If you live in Detroit, A is the right answer as well. So in those cases, you would have two correct answers. So I know that it's USA, right? Similarly, I can cross off nevertheless, because I know that if nevertheless were to be right, so would be however. So backing up a little bit here, just didn't want to get rid of that answer. I'm crossing nevertheless off because it's a subset of however. And I can't be asked in this particular situation where we're not dealing with, you know, the comma fanboys phenomenon. If we're not dealing with that, I can't be asked to choose between however and yet. Those are very similar. So once again, by process of elimination, I can pick A. The reason this is a weird question is most high school students are not using the word then in this way. The word then in this case is sort of like the word therefore. And that's absolutely true. We say things like that all the time. If one thing is true, another thing is true, right? If, comma, then, or not if, comma, then, but if something, then another thing. That's another way of saying like therefore, right? Cause and effect. If one thing happens, but the effect is another thing. Therefore, or then, functioning the same way. So there's a couple things worth noticing here. Obviously, it's nice to know that the word then works like therefore, because what we're saying is Like, therefore, for commercial and arguably creative reasons, no transition was more successful than that. It ends up being the word that, from gold into silver. Right? So that's nice to know. But maybe more importantly, as a test taker, is that you can get rid of equivalent answers. However, and nevertheless, and yet all kind of function the same way. And another, subset of that was that we are getting rid of nevertheless whenever it's in the presence of however. However could be right, nevertheless cannot be right, because it's a subset of however. It's a city within the state of however. Okay, so stopping the screen share. Hopefully that brought you back to me. I can't see you, but hopefully you can see me. Aha, I can see you now. So I think that that's really important to notice that it's about knowing some things about grammar. Sure, it's good to know that, comma fanboys thing where you can separate two full sentences. By the way, that's equivalent to a period. So you should never be asked to choose between, an appropriate, if you're using the word and makes sense, you should never have to choose between period or comma and. And in fact, to add to that list, a semicolon is also equivalent to either of those things. So you shouldn't be asked to choose between equivalent ideas, and you can use that to your advantage. And in this case, we said, well, nevertheless is out because it's a subset of however. And then however and yet, the difference between these two is not present in this question. So we can't be asked to choose between two things which are functionally the same, right? So we get rid of answers that way, right? And I think it's really important that you're not looking for the best answer out of nowhere, but you're looking for an answer that, an answer that sort of is left after you've gotten rid of other answers. Remember on that comics question before with possession, I got rid of stuff not based on comics ending with an S and that sneaky little apostrophe at the end. I got rid of it just based on superheroes and one bit of logic, right? So hopefully that was helpful. We're going to screen share again here, and we're going to get into some math stuff. So these questions come from the end of, I believe, practice test 7. But these particular questions were asked by a student of mine who asked us to go through this. So back through the vortex here, out the other side. Hopefully you're looking at my chalkboard now. And let's bring up some of these questions. These were the last few questions at the end of a non-calculator section. So non-calculator section goes through number 20. However, 13, 14, 15 are the last of the multiple choice. So these are supposed to be difficult. 2 ways of doing number 13. One of them is far more useful than the others. So there's a thing on the SAT which you should be aware of, and I want you to practice this if you get a chance. If you have variables in the answer choices, which we have X's in the answer choices, you can just pick any real number you want for X and try to make your life as easy as possible. Like, I guess the easiest thing I could pick maybe is like 4. If I pick X equals 4, I will have a really easy time because my denominator will be 1, which seems convenient. The thing about picking real numbers is you still have to try out all the answers, because multiple answers might work if you were to pick something that leads to a special circumstance, right? So, okay, let's do the math here. 4 squared, 16, minus 2 times 4, which is 8, minus 5. Okay, so I believe that works out to 3. 16 minus 8 is 8, minus another 5 is 3. And then on the bottom, we had 4 minus 3, which is just 1, and we did that on purpose so that we would get a nice, easy answer. We're looking for something that's equal to 3, or 3 over 1, right? Okay, well, don't rule stuff out just like right away, but I mean, like, what do we have here? 4, we're putting in 4 for all of our X values, so here and here. And let's see what that gives us. 4 minus 5, negative 1, minus 20 over, the reason we did this is because this was going to be easy, 20 over 1. So this is not right. Okay, because that's definitely not equal to 3. 1 minus 20. I wouldn't spend the extra time trying to think about what it even is. And some of this math's already done for us now. Now we're just saying, well, this is still negative 1, 4 minus 5. And then minus 10 over 1. Again, no, that's not right. I don't have to figure out exactly what it is or spend any time on that. Answer choice C says that this is equal to, 4 plus 1 is 5. 5 minus 8 over 1. And that's negative 3. so it must be D. I'm done, depending on how confident I am. If I feel like doing the work, sure, x equals 4 again, that's 5 minus 2 over 4 minus 3 is just another 1, and that is indeed correct. That's the best way to do these questions, because even though I talked slowly and worked through it, you could get that done in probably 30 seconds, maybe a minute, and that's totally fine for your pace on number 13. The fancy way of doing it is polynomial division. So, just to show you how that works. I will say I haven't seen a question on the SAT for which you need to use polynomial division and you couldn't just do what we just did by picking a real number. But just in case you're curious, it's good to be curious. Polynomial division works by using the leading term of both expressions. So, and that's on the way up, you worry about the leading term. On the way down, you use everything. So how that works is, how many times does x go into x squared? Well, multiply x times x. That's how you get x squared. Cool. We're also going to multiply x, like I said, not just the leading term on the way down. On the way down, you do everything. So x times x is x squared. X times -3 is -3x. And then you subtract to see what you have left over. Be careful about this piece. This is the hard part. The reason it's hard is because it's easy. I'm sorry, x squared minus x squared is 0. And then now we have to, the part that's hard is you have to distribute this negative sign. It's not hard, you just have to be careful. -2, and then I guess plus 3x, which is positive 1x. And then bring this last piece down to see what's left. Sometimes it's x go into 1x, of course, 1 time. Multiply the 1 times everything over here. That gives me, of course, 1x, and then -3. So subtract this stuff. You can see where the mistakes happen. This is how you would get answer choice C, is if you forgot to subtract here, right? And then lastly, so -5 plus 3 is equal to -2. That's our remainder. That is, we can't divide x minus 3 by, I'm sorry, we can't divide 2 by x minus 3. We don't know how many times, x minus 3 goes into 2 because, it's a variable. So we leave this as x plus 1 with a remainder of -2 over x minus 3. So that's how that works. And yeah, cool, you could do it that way, but there's traps waiting for you. And if you just pick a smart real number, there's not really any traps waiting for you. So I'm going to stop screen sharing here. I just want to talk about something really quickly. Here's the deal. On the SAT, oftentimes you're asked to do something that you know a way of doing it. A lot of times it's about writing an equation, right, out of a word problem. It's not that doing that is just necessarily a bad idea. It's not that it's a bad idea to write an equation. Maybe you're good at writing equations. But let's start by saying one thing. Almost everybody dislikes word problems because word problems make you write equations, right? In math class, if you get a whole list of just expressions or equations and you have to do some work on them, fine. The thing that a lot of people dislike is having to actually write the equations. The reason is because that requires some creative energy. And that's, maybe we don't think of that as creative, but it really is. So, that's something that everyone already naturally knows that they dislike, right? It's also something that you could easily make a mistake doing. You could easily write the wrong equation for something. And that's part of the trouble about the SAT. It's not that this work is actually that hard. It's that it's easy to make mistakes, right? The math isn't super hard. It's just easy to get stuff wrong. So if you're trying to develop a strategy to avoid mistakes on the SAT, the best thing you can do is to do things differently than they want you to do. Use multiple choice answers to your advantage and try not to make equations. Try not to do things in traditional ways if you can, especially in hard questions, medium and hard questions, I would say, right? So look, if you get on the test and you actually want to develop, write your own equations out, okay, fine. But you should have something else at your disposal so that you're capable of doing things differently than everybody else. There's traps set for everyone making equations on word problems. There's traps set for everybody who did polynomial division on that last question. There's no trap set for you if you pick x equals 4, because that's not what everyone's doing, right? So they can't guard against every possible scenario. What they're doing is developing answers that are close to right for students who make obvious sort of traditional mistakes. If you're doing things in a non-traditional way, you're not going to make the traditional mistake. There's no trap answer waiting for you, which means if you do something wrong, you're not going to think you're right. You're going to have a chance to go, hold on, wait, there's none of my answers works here, which is obviously unfun. But it's better, actually, than the opposite, where you think you have the right answer, you move on confidently, and you didn't get the points, right? So, okay, I'm going to screen share again, and I just want to bring up the next question here. We got 2 more math questions. So, they're both really, in my opinion, kind of interesting questions that bring up kind of some unique challenges. So this test, this is what you should expect near the end of the test, is a few different, totally unique challenges. Sorry, I'm messing with this figure here. Okay, here we go. So first thing you do on any question on the SAT is try to figure out what's going on. Like, what is this question about? And my first clues are always in the answer choices. Like, go to the answer choices first before you go anywhere else. So going to these answer choices, obviously there's this thing with 10 and 20, right? And obviously it's about inequalities, and X is in between these two things. And that's enough for now. You just want to know that. And then the next thing to do, speaking of word problems, is start here, right? If a box has a height of 60 and a length of 2.5 times the width, okay, let's just pull those out. H equals 60 and length is equal to 2.5 times the width. Which inequality shows the allowable width X inches of the box? Okay, well, obviously there's other stuff that's going to matter up here. And we do have variables in our answers, but they're asking us what is that variable, right? So it's not quite a question. I mean, like, we could pick numbers, but like picking numbers doesn't immediately work out down here. There's some things to consider first, right? So going back up, it turns out what we learn is that there's restrictions on the dimensions of a box that you can ship. It says the sum of the perimeter of the base of the box. Okay, so if we've got a height and then we've got a length and a width, the base is like the length and the width, right? The height is not the base, right? This is height. So we want to think about length and width. Okay, cool. Well, that perimeter, I think it's really important to say, let's just pause and tell ourselves what the sum of the perimeter, what the perimeter even is. That's 2 lengths plus 2 W's. That's the perimeter, right? So the perimeter, the sum of the perimeter and the height. Okay, so what we're interested in is 2L plus 2W plus H, right? Cannot exceed 130 inches. Okay, so if I was doing it in a traditional way, I would say something like less than or equal to 130. Right? This would be the traditional way of doing this question. But let me just, I know that everyone would have been going nuts if I didn't show you this equation. Of course, then you can solve, and you know that the height is 60, and you can solve. So fine, you can totally do that. And we'll talk about the pitfalls of that in a second. But maybe the best thing to do right here, instead of just solving this equation like in the traditional way, is to just think about values that would get rid of answer choices, right? Like, for instance, if X equals 11 if X equals 11 is a really interesting number here. The reason it's interesting is because if X equals 11, this is wrong, and the rest of these are right, right? So even a better number would be X equals like 15. If X equals 15 works, then we're out of these 2 answers, and we can only try one more number. So we could try out things like X equals 11, X equals 15, and maybe X equals 18. These are really useful numbers because they're in between these sets. And the most important one to start with is X is 15. So I'm picking a number again. X is 15. Okay, that's width. And then length is 2.5 times that. Okay, well, you know what? I'm going to adjust my number just slightly and call it 16, because 16 works just as good for our purposes of being in between these 2 answers. And it also allows me to multiply by 2.5 a little bit more nicely, right? Okay, so if width is 16, length is 2.5 times 16, well, 16 times 2 is 32, plus 8 more is 40. Length is 40, and height is 60. Okay, and let's see, the perimeter of the base of the box would be 2 of these, which is 80, 2 of these, which is 32, and then 60. And you could probably see, just based on 80 and 60, that's too big. Cross off 2 answers. So now just try X's. Let's just try X's is, yeah, we'll do x is 11. It'll be a little gross with the decimal, but it won't be too bad. If x is 11, now the reason, to be clear, the reason I'm trying 11 is it's just in between these two sets. So whatever happens there, the same way 16 did not work, which allowed us to cross off stuff like this and this, 11 can help us. Because if 11 works, it's got to be this one. If 11 doesn't work, it's A. Okay, so 2.5 times the width. So width is 11. Length is 2.5 times that, which is 22 plus 5.5. That's 27.5. And then height is still 60. Okay, well, 2 of each of these. This is 22. This 27.5 times 2 is 55, I think. And then 60. Okay, so let's see if that works. Add these up. 60 and 55 is 115, right? And then 115 plus 22 is 135, more than 135, right? That's my lazy man's math, and it's important to be able to do lazy man's math. Like, you could just say, okay, well, this is 77. 77 and 60 is more than 130, okay? So this must be the right answer. And that approach, I know that when I move slowly through it, talking my whole way out, it looks like it takes a while. But honestly, what you just get good at is you say to yourself, okay, well, let's find some numbers for x. Like, I didn't even need this equation, by the way. I didn't need to write all this out. All I needed to do was say, pick some numbers for x, and then run them through the system. And notice I'm working sort of like backwards through the question, right? Width is x. Length is 2.5x. Height is 60. Exceed 130. Cannot exceed 130. So I worked backwards through those, starting with x, and that's a predictable thing you can do throughout the test. Let me just show you the other way, just because I do want to be open to the idea that you can do questions multiple ways. Right? If you were doing it this way, what you would have to do next is say h equals 60. So I could just simplify and say 2L plus 2W, subtract 60 from both sides, and that's equal to now 70. So now what I would do is say W is x, right? So now we have 2L to start with plus 2x. And then the thing is, length can be expressed in terms of width, right? So length here could be said to be 2.5x. So 2 times 2.5x plus 2x is greater than or equal to 70. 5x plus 2x, obviously, this is going to be 7x. And then, of course, divide by 7, x is less than or equal to 10. So cool. We can do it that way. I'm not even saying that that's a bad way of doing it. I'm just saying that, like, there's a reason this is number 14. And I think, let me stop screen sharing for a second. I think that it's important to be a little bit humble about this stuff. The hardest thing for me in my job is to get really smart folks to adopt strategies like this. Smart people don't want to do this. But I'm not just like saying we should do this stuff because, you know, I want to make your life worse, right? Like, my job is to help people get their scores up on this test, get to fantastic scores. And I've been fortunate enough, I suppose, in the fact that I've had good students, but I also feel like I've learned over the years how to do this, how to really get people a top score on this test. Bottom line is, if you do things in a traditional way, you're going to make a couple of mistakes, right? Like, my students have improved from like 1,000 to 1,450. I've seen that this year. I've seen a 450 point increase for one student. I saw another student with about 400 points. I see a lot of students to get 200 points. 200 points is like good as far as I'm concerned, but not great. If you're trying to get from 1,300 to 1,500, that's an awesome 200 points, right? If you're trying to get from 1,000 somewhere, well, I want you in the 1,300 range. Bottom line is, the way that I've helped people get those score improvements comes down to really impressing upon them the fact that you should be able to do that last question in this different way. You shouldn't have to do it the traditional way. So practice doing things in this different way so that you can get confident doing it, because it gets easier and easier, and it's a way more useful way of doing questions. Because again, there's no trap set for you if you're doing things non-traditionally. Okay, one more question. Let's see what it is here. I know it's number 15 from this test. I don't remember what it looks like though. Ah, yes. Okay. What is the value of k? So a kind of a good one to see, because what we don't have is variables in the answer choices, but what we do have is just values of k. And you could literally just try these values out, and that would be the smart thing to do. And obviously the easy ones to start with are 2 and 6, right? I mean, why not? Let's just do it. So this is better than the old-fashioned way because it'll catch a mistake that everyone makes. Everyone makes the mistake of thinking that k is, I believe people want to say it's just root 2. Sometimes people just recognize the difference of squares. They go, oh, well, you know, x minus k, x plus k. That always works out to x squared minus k squared. And you should know that. If you don't know that, that's okay. To be clear, why does that work? First term is x squared. You're going to do the FOIL method, right? First term. Outside term is kx. Inside term is negative kx. Last term is negative k squared. These cancel, so you get x squared minus k squared. And then people kind of forget that this 1/3 has to hit this to get, it hits k in order to get to -2. You know, essentially what we have is 1/3 times the quantity x squared minus k squared. And of course, once you see that, okay, well, then you know 1/3 x squared minus 1/3 k squared equals, you know, this expression. Now 1/3, -1/3 k squared is -2, and you can do the work from there to get, I believe it's root 6. Obviously, you can do that. And if you do that, I just want you to be aware of something. If you do that, and you need to be able to understand why people would make mistakes here, right? So for instance, you'd be like, oh, well, I know it's root 6. I know people could easily pick these answers, and I know why. If you're staring at this and you pick root 2 or something, you might be able to say like, oh, this is k squared, so I know why people would pick that. But ask yourself questions about these 6s. Why in the world are those 6s coming up? Asking and exploring about those questions is how you guard against mistakes. So you can do things in a traditional way, but make sure you're asking yourself small questions about your answer choices. Why in the world are these 6s here? They don't make any sense if you think the answer is 2 or root 2. If you know that this is the right answer, now you can understand why all these incorrect answers are here. You go, oh, here's k squared. Here's if people forget to distribute the 1/3. Right? So to be clear, you can do it the traditional way, but probably a better way is to just put a 2 in there and say 1/3 x minus 2 x plus 2. And by the way, you could pick a value for x if you want to. And then you could make your life really easy. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to say 1/3 x squared minus 4, and then be like, okay, well, that clearly doesn't get me -2. Okay. Well, then I might try 6. 1/3 be x minus 6, x plus 6. You're going to see pretty quickly that that doesn't work, x plus 6, because you're going to get 1/3 x squared minus 36. Okay, that's not giving me a 2. And you move on to these 2 answers. And ultimately, the one that works, of course, is 1/3. If you did x minus root 6, x plus root 6, this becomes x squared minus 6 times 1/3. And of course, when that 1/3 gets distributed, it gives you the -2 you're looking for, right? So I think what's really interesting, and I want just the last thing we want to say today, is that it's really easy to look at these questions with hindsight and say these are easy questions. But the thing is, this is a real test, and this test, smart people make mistakes on these questions reliably, right? So most important thing you can do is humble yourself to that task. Okay, know that people are going to make mistakes here. So your job is to figure out how to do questions so that you avoid those mistakes. And if you don't do it in that sort of non-traditional way by picking real numbers for variables, or by just using the numbers given to you for the variable k in this case, or the constant k, but whatever. The letter k becomes the numbers in the answer choices, just trying them out. If you're not going to do it that way, it's okay. I would suggest that you practice doing that, but at least, like, if you're going to take the test in a couple days or something, you know, I think there's another test in May. If you're not going to do any more studying, and you just remember one thing, remember that you should be using the answer choices to check your work. Check your work in a different way than the way you originally did it. Don't just do it again. I think we all have that experience of being like, why am I even doing this? Why am I checking my work? I just did this work. Right? Check it in a different way than you did it the first time. So a great way to do that on a multiple choice test is use the answers. right? What do these answers tell me about the traps that are sitting here? We know that students that get the answers wrong are not just going to be dummies. They're going to be people who made a classic mistake, right? So the logical thing to do is to say, let's use these answer choices to check out mistakes. Why would someone pick 6 in the case of that last question? Why would someone do that? If you start asking yourself about that, and you could be kind of sometimes I like to joke myself when I'm overly confident. Why would some idiot pick 6? The funny thing about that, the reason it's a joke, is that sometimes by examining that, you realize, well, actually, I was the one making a mistake. And I understand why 6 is there now because it's the right answer. Root 6 is the right answer. I understand why 6 is there. I understand why 2 and root 2 are there, right? When you've got the right answer, you should be able to understand at least a couple of the answer choices, hopefully all of them. Okay, so that's it for office hours today. We appreciate you tuning in. We appreciate if you could help us by sending us more questions that have come up for you in your study, things you're wondering about, whether you're a teacher and you're trying to help your students, whether you're a college counselor and you just want to get these kids into the schools they want to go to, right? Like, how can we help? And if you're just a student, if you're a student, not just a student, you're so much more than just a student. But if you're a student, then by all means, whether you work with us or not, send us questions. We would be happy to answer them here. We know that tutoring is expensive, and we want to at least get you the right information if we can't work with you one-on-one. So until next time, this has been Office Hours. I'm Jeremy Champa from Higher Learning Test Prep. Remote tutors is also a part of our process here. And so I would like you to send us questions to either of those companies through our YouTube channels, email, Skype, whatever you like. Just get in touch. We'll be happy to help. See you next time. Bye.